The world is round. Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Joanna Newsom album, Divers.
Newsom? Newsom what?
Joanna Newsom.
She knew some what, Anthony?
Joanna Newsom!
Newsom what?
Joanna Newsom!
Newsom what? What'd she know?
Shut up!
She know
Shut up!
good?
Stop talking! Shut up! Joanna Newsom is a harp-plucking singer-songwriter and indie darling, and this is her fourth full-length album. She is back with this record over here after a 5-year-long studio album silence, which hasn't really been that arduous of a wait, since with her last record she gave us so much material to digest. This is a 3-part record. It was 2 hours long, loaded with tracks that were influenced by classical and Baroque era music, folk music, as well as a little bit of jazz as well. There were definitely multiple sides to this album, and it was a high watermark of ambition for Joanna's discography. She's really given this album time to breathe. But now with this new album over here, there were some singles that teased toward the release of this thing, which I liked, although I didn't really go into this thing expecting her to top Have One on Me or really deliver anything wildly different, because even as Joanna isn't dropping music or hasn't been dropping music over the past 5 years, no one's really kind of usurped her position as this oddball queen of underground and experimental and eclectic folk music. She is still a really standout artist, and almost still to a fault, to the point where her very eclectic musical mannerisms turn some people off. She's pretty polarizing in some respects, especially with her vocals, which continue to be an acquired taste, but for those who love Joanna's music, she's really yet to do wrong in the eyes of her audience as far as full-length albums go. And I think she sort of continues this very good album streak with Divers over here. Now, this album obviously is nowhere near as grand as Have One on Me, but I don't really think it's any less special. I actually appreciate the more direct delivery Joanna is giving us with this new record over here, at least on the musical side of things. I feel like we're getting a bit of the mystical world of her debut record and yeast mixed with some of the more modern musical sounds that were on Have One on Me. Divers is essentially the bridge between these two worlds, and it's nice. I enjoy it. However, it's not really that new or bold of a sound for Joanna, so I wouldn't really be surprised if this record didn't carry too far outside of her immediate fan base, just because it's not really that new or exciting of a sound for her. Musically, Joanna isn't really breaking too much new ground on this thing, but Divers still stands on the quality of its melodic writing, its instrumental arrangements, its eclectic and very emotional vocal performances, and its songwriting too. I think the characteristic about this album that makes it special and makes it stand out from the rest of Joanna's discography is the most subtle of all of the elements going into this album, and that's the lyrics. In some ways, the lyrics on this record resemble the lyrics of past records. They still try to build up this land of musical make-believe. They're very esoteric. They're not visceral all that often. They're very hard to read, kind of opaque, and they sound like they sort of come from a fairy tale land of some sort. But each of these songs dive into different stories and situations while continually making references to time and death and existence and constants, which I think I'll get deeper into the ideas of that later into this review. Musically, I think the album starts off very nicely with the song Ancestors, which I think kind of has a vibe of a morning, a sunrise. Things are going from just complete silence to cold to totally warm and just embracing. I love the growing synthesizers and woodwinds and strings on this track, especially as the song progresses toward its finish. They are absolutely gorgeous, and Joanna is wonderful vocally laced into them. But one thing about this track is that it is very, very piano-driven, just as many other songs on Have One on Me were. And of course there is still harp presence on this album, but a vast majority of the songs on this record are very piano-driven. The harp sort of feels like it's a little bit more in the background on many of these tracks. So Joanna taking things in a bit more of a piano direction, this continues on to the next track, SAPOKANIKAN, which is this multifaceted, winding story of a tune with a very beautiful finish. And the most prominent thing right at the beginning of this track is that piano once again, and there are some really just wonderful swaggering piano phrases all over the beginning of this track that I like a lot, that I think have a lot of personality, this type of swagger you don't often hear in Joanna's music. Between this piano, between the drums and Joanna's vocals, I think the song has quite a bit of pep. And once again, that mood change that occurs maybe in the last third of the song, which brings us to that very wonderful ending, is a very nice change of pace too. But as good as the instrumentation is, the lyrics really feel like the driving force of the song. I almost feel like I'm listening to some kind of Tolkien book set to music, the music of Joanna Newsom, the music of this song, when I'm just kind of paying attention to what she's singing. With Leaving the City, the harp takes the spotlight once again, and the lyrics here don't quite feel as archaic as Joanna's lyrics do. They're a little bit more modern, which makes the story here feel a little more anachronistic, because this is one of the tracks on the record that musically actually kind of goes back in time and I don't know, feels maybe a bit medieval. But the horns and the keys or electric guitar or something, there's some kind of searing instrument on this mix that's just tucked away behind Joanna's vocals and the harp that adds a lot of character to the instrumentation on here. It definitely gives a different vibe than you would normally get from a Joanna Newsom song. And I think this track has the most hard-hitting and decisive and visceral, maybe even explosive melody on the entire record, which hits a really odd groove too. Boop, 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 boop. I just love the sort of strange loop that this theme melody has. And on the song Goose Eggs, another noticeable change of pace. Joanna indulges in the kind of folk and American country Western balladry that you would typically expect from drag city records, like something Bonnie Prince Billy might do. It's actually a really sweet song, and Joanna's vocals go from their sort of odd, mystical eclecticism to something that's kind of soulful. The twang guitars on this track are really nice. I mean, this track could have even fit in a pedal steel, and it would have fit the personality of the song perfectly. It's interesting to kind of hear Joanna go in this direction. Of course, she's proved her versatility on Have One on Me, but didn't know she could so easily slip into something of this style and have it be one of the most charming songs on the entire record. And then with the following cut, Waltz of the 101st LIGHTBORNE, we get into the lyrics a little bit on this track. It's kind of war-themed. Joanna's voice continues on this sort of soulful streak. And story-wise, Joanna sort of seems to be playing this lover whose significant other dies in battle, or just dies as the result of a battle. And if you continue with the lyrics on this track, things get kind of interesting and maybe even a little sci-fi-ish as Joanna starts to sing about themes of time and space and traveling light and sort of the future and the past. It feels almost a little steampunky, or maybe sort of in this anachronistic world of science, but also the Industrial Revolution, kind of like maybe a bit of BioShock Infinite inspired, or maybe something where you kind of see multiple dimensions sort of living out their own different trajectories, like Interstellar or something like that. And the second half of this album, I don't think it's quite the stunner the first half is. We have a few detour tracks here that don't sound as lush instrumentally as many of the other cuts here, but there's something about what is said in the lyrics and also the personality of these tracks that I think works into what Divers is trying to do conceptually. On the song, not only is there this theme of New York as a city kind of like going on, living on, just continuing, but I also like the sort of lo-fi, droney instrumentation. I think the song is really hypnotic. I wish it kind of fit in aesthetically with the rest of the record, but the song itself feels like a bit of a throwback, a bit of a memento from the past, and I think this album is something that's very much tortured by the past, or concerned with the past, concerned with history, concerned with the future as well. And on the track Things I Say, we get a continuation of the themes on this album of aging and regrets and existence. And once someone dies, is that a life that is unlived, or does it carry on in some kind of alternate world or something? And musically, this is a very stripped back tune as well, mostly vocals and piano with a strange reverbed insert of instrumentation right at the end of the track, which sort of ends the song entirely. It sounds almost as if the track is kind of sucked away into an abyss or sort of brought up in a UFO or something. It just sort of disappears before my very ears on the track listing here. But still, I do like that on this song as well, we're kind of getting this old school American folk music tradition embraced once again. Unfortunately, these songs add to a somewhat disjointed feel on this record a little bit, but I think it's mostly because these tracks are supposed to represent different times or periods or places or something. It's almost as if the second half of this album, Joanna spends time, now that the theme and I guess the concept has been kind of set, visiting different spots and giving us different snapshots of I don't know, stories, emotions that might relate to some of what's being sung about in the tales on the first half of this record. I think the title track is maybe the strongest moment on the entire second half of this record. I think the instrumental is absolutely gorgeous. Joanna shows off more Joni Mitchell and more Kate Bush influence than she's ever shown off before on a previous record. And the chord changes on this track are excellent, and they totally fit the very dramatic lyrical imagery that is brought up throughout this track. On this song, Joanna's singing is not only great, but it's toned down to the point where I can really hang on every single word. And she constantly brings up words that make me feel as if I'm just sliding downward into a watery abyss, and the music certainly gives off that vibe as well. And I was a little disappointed that some tracks like You Will Not Take My Heart Alive are as short as they are, do sort of have an abrupt ending to them. I do think that has to do with sort of the snapshot characteristic of the latter half of this album, or sort of giving us these moments and we don't get to stay in them as long as we want, or they're kind of torn away from us by time. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is this longing, there is this desire for consistency and for something constant to occur, but because change is inevitable, because change is necessary, and change often happens when we don't want it to occur, then stuff is just changing and torn away from us and it's just gone. I think that's an interesting idea, even if it impacts a few of the tracks in the last half of this record in a somewhat negative way. Though I do think it impacts the final track on this record in a very interesting way. Not only is this one of the most fiery tracks on the record and has a beautiful instrumental crescendo toward the very end, but Joanna's vocals, as they are intensifying and she's singing about transcending and transitioning or transmitting in this cyclical mantra on the very end of the song, she ends on that trans and it's just totally done. And the intro track here actually starts with her singing sending as the first word, and it sort of gives the album this sort of loop quality. And maybe other songs on this album link together in a very similar way that I haven't totally figured out yet. Overall, I thought this was a great album. Not a whole lot of complaints about it other than that, I just wish it sort of went into a few more different musical directions for Joanna and sort of took a bit more musical risks. But still, I think the songwriting overall is very great. I think the vocal and the instrumental performances are fantastic. I think the lyrics and the concept going into this record were very good, very entertaining, intriguing. Yeah, I have a few reservations about the record, but it's really not enough to take away from its beauty and its really refreshing lyrical ideas. It's not a big album, but it's definitely an enveloping album, an album I can get kind of lost in, not only because I think it presents a different musical world, as most Joanna Newsom albums usually do, but also a different lyrical world, something slightly different from what Joanna typically does. I would actually say this record presents a different side to Joanna's personality altogether, which I think is really nice. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. I'm feeling a decent to strong 8 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? If you have, tell me what you thought of it. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? What should I review next? You're the best. Forever.